So, yeah, it's good to be here. So glad to see you guys. And again, I want to ask you a question. Hebrews chapter 11 is where we're going to be today, but let me ask you a question as we talk about this topic of surrender, when we're talking about revival and revive us. I want to ask you this question. Is Jesus enough for you? Is Jesus enough for you? There's so many things in life that can take our time, that can take up our space, that can take up our efforts. And the question is it Jesus plus something else, or is Jesus enough? We just spent 8 days in Roatan, Honduras with a team of 22. It was pretty incredible. It's a place that Charlotte and I love a lot. And for 8 days, we were focused on Jesus, on people in need, and on service. We didn't have to deal with all the stuff you guys were dealing with back here, all the news and all the other stuff. We were focused on Jesus, and He was enough. In fact, sometimes I wish we could do that more. Sometimes I wish that I could block out all of the world. I could block out all the stuff that's going on in our world, and I could just focus on Him, because when it comes down to revival, personal revival, it really comes down to, is Jesus enough for me? And if He is, then what else do I need? We've been talking about different topics, these different themes that bring personal revival, hopefully calling the church, awakening the church to personal revival. But I hope you understand that revival doesn't happen in churches. Revival doesn't happen in countries. It doesn't happen in organizations. It happens in people. Revival first starts in people, and then it spreads to those other things. And each one of these themes that we've talked about, humility and forgiveness and confession and surrender and witness, all of these things are themes that we see in people who have been personally revived by Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 11, we read about a bunch of heroes of the faith, if you will. Heroes of the faith. A lot of these Bible characters and the things that they did that made their faith so strong, because surrender takes faith. Surrender comes from faith. And we're going to look at one today. His name is Abraham. Actually, Abraham and his wife Sarah. And we're going to look at their faith, and there's going to be 3 things we're going to see. 3 what I'm going to call requirements of surrender. If you're going to surrender, you need these 3 things. If you're going to be revived personally, you're going to need these 3 things in your life to see personal revival. Now, I want to be cautious here, because it'd be real easy for you to see these 3 things and say, wait, I don't have those things, and feel bad about yourself, feel guilty. It can be really heavy, right? I don't want you to see them as shortcomings. I want you to see them as benchmarks. Things that you need to be achieving towards. So let's look at the first one. The first one is going to be found in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning with verse 8. It says this: by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed. And he set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance, a promised land that God had promised him. He went out even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents, as did Isaac his son and Jacob his grandson, co-heirs of that same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So Abraham obeyed. Why did Abraham obey? Because he was called. The word for called here, the Greek word is kaleo. Kaleo means to be named or to be summoned. It also can mean to be called out for a specific task. So he was called by God to do something, and he obeyed. His obedience was based on a promise. A promise. We find this promise in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. What was that promise? The promise was this: God promised him a new land that was going to become his. We know it today as the land of Israel. He promised him that he would be a big family. He would have a big family, and he would be that God would bless that family. And that would become a great nation. Again, the place we know is Israel. And then he also promised him that he would be a blessing to all nations. So that was the promise. So he obeyed based on that promise. But I want you to notice something. He didn't obey based on the details. Did you notice that God said, go and then I will show? God said, go and then I'll show. How many of you were the other way, right? God, show and then I'll go. If you show me what's going to be on the other side, then I'll go. That's what our obedience sometimes is based on. I don't know about you, but there's a lot of things in my life that have happened that if I'd known the details, I probably wouldn't have gone anyway, right? There's a lot of things you've gone through that it's good that you went through those things, but if you had already known those up front, you probably wouldn't have gone. So he's willing to go without knowing the details because it's not about knowing the details. Faith is literally defined by not knowing the details. Look at verse 1 of Hebrews chapter 11. It says, now faith is the reality of what is hoped for. It is the proof of what is not seen. So the first benchmark that we're achieving to surrender, to say, I will follow God, surrender requires blind obedience. It requires blind obedience. If I'm going to say, I will follow you, God, I must be willing to go wherever He tells me, whenever He tells me to go, to say whatever He tells me to say, to do whatever He tells me to do, to not do whatever He tells me not to do. Blind obedience. If I'm going to surrender, it requires that. Now we understand this. It's called following instructions. Some of you ladies, you're really good at cooking. Some of you, not so much. No, I'm just kidding. Some of you are really good cooks. And some of you don't need the recipe, right? You say, I don't need the recipe, right? Let me ask you a question, though. You are following a recipe, aren't you? It's just here instead of on paper. And what would your family do if you didn't follow the recipe that was up here? What if, let's say, you replaced baking soda with baking powder? Might taste different, right? Your family might notice. What if you replace salt for sugar? Might tell the difference, right? So you have to follow the instructions. Guys, we're not off the hook. We don't like to follow directions when it comes, to anything. But when it comes to how we're going, right? I don't mind admitting to every one of you, I could not find my way anywhere if it wasn't for GPS now. I'm completely ruined. I used to be able to find my way around. Now I need GPS to get everywhere. I put it in. That way we can see. Charlotte will use this excuse. Well, let's find out how the traffic is. No, she knows I need direction, right? You remember the days when you used to buy a bike for your kid for Christmas? You had to stay up all night putting it together? And you remember when you got to the end and there was extra parts and you didn't know, right? You've got to follow the instructions. And if we're going to obey God, we got to follow the instructions whenever, whatever, to do whatever, to go wherever, right? Because that's what blind obedience looks like. Well, how is his faith so strong? How did he do that? It's because he saw himself as a foreigner. He saw himself as a foreigner in the land. The word foreigner means to belong to another. Now, I want to remind you, God had promised him this land. So he came from Ur of the Chaldees. That was not home. It never felt like home. He's going to this land God promised. Now, if God promised to give you a house, would it feel like home? Yeah, God gave it to me. That's not how Abraham saw it. He lived as a foreigner in the land, living in tents the rest of his life. In fact, his son Isaac and his grandson Jacob also lived as foreigners in the land because these places were not home. Why? Because he was looking forward to a home that was somewhere else. He was looking forward to his future home. He's looking forward to heaven. If you look in verses 13 to 16, the Hebrew writer talks about a lot of these people, these heroes of the faith. Listen to what he says about them. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. How many times have you gotten mad at God because he promised something and then it didn't, and you didn't receive it? Is it enough that he promised it? Is he still God? Right? But they saw them from a distance, they greeted them, and they confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. Now, those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they were thinking about where they came from, they would have an opportunity to return. But they now desire a better place, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. You see, the key is this. Surrender is not about the where. It's not about the what. It's not even about the why. It's about the who. When we understand it's not about the details, but it's about the one who calls me to the task, and I know that he knows the details, that's enough. I dated a girl in college. Her dad was a sheep farmer, and I learned an incredible lesson from him. It's about the only thing I gained from this relationship, but that's a whole nother story. One day we were out in the pen, and there was a bunch of sheep, and there was a barn door that was open. And he said, Nathan, I want you to take these sheep, and I want you to push them into that barn door. So I got behind him. College kid, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm pushing these sheep, trying to get them to go through the barn door. Every one of them, as soon as they got to the barn door, they turned to the right or the left, right? They wouldn't go. Then he showed off. He goes, hey, watch this. He took off and he started walking. They all started following him. And he walked through the barn door, and every one of those sheep followed him through that barn door. Why? Because he knew what was on the other side. They knew that he would not take them somewhere that would be dangerous. They trusted him. They were willing to follow him blindly because they trusted the one. It's not about the what. It's not about the why. It's not about any of that stuff. It is about the who. We used to sing a song called I Know Who Holds Tomorrow. Some of you know the words of this. I don't know about tomorrow. I just live from day to day. I don't borrow from its sunshine, for its skies may turn to gray. I don't worry o'er the future, for I know what Jesus said. And today I'll walk beside him, for he knows what is ahead. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. The first thing we have to understand is surrender comes from faith, and faith requires that I have blind obedience. Why? Because blind obedience comes from spiritual focus. Blind obedience comes from spiritual focus. When I'm focused on spiritual things, I will obey blindly. Let's go to the next one. The next requirement of faith, which leads to surrender, is found in verse 11. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring. By the way, let me read the next line. Even though she was past the age, she was 65 years old. You ladies think about that for a minute, all right? Since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful, therefore from one man, I love this, in fact, from one as good as dead, Abraham was 75 years old, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and as innumerable as the grains of the sand along the seashore. Sarah received power. Abraham did too, but Sarah received power. Why did she receive power? This word power is dunamis. It's where we get the word dynamite. It's a supernatural power. Why did she receive it? She received it because she believed that God's power would do the impossible because of a promise. God had promised you're going to have a son. God had promised that son is going to be the father of many nations, and she believed him. Here's the fun part. It was 25 years later when Isaac was born. They were promised at 65 and 75. Do the math. They were 90 and 100 when it happened. Anybody in here groaning right now, right? And why? Because Sarah was past the age to conceive. Abraham was as good as dead, but they believed, they had faith in God, because surrender requires reliance on divine power. If you're going to have faith and you're going to surrender to God whatever he wants from you, if you're going to go, even though you don't know the details, you have to rely on his power. Why? Because he's the God of the impossible. Because he's the God who does things bigger than we can even think. Listen to these stories. Noah's Ark, right? The God of the impossible. Moses and the Red Sea, parting the water so the people could walk across on dry land. The God of the impossible. Daniel saved from the mouths of the lions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and the fourth man in the fire that came along. Jonah saved from the belly of the whale. Then you get to Jesus' life and he turned water into wine. He walked on the water. He fed 5,000 men, women, and then plus the women and children. He healed the blind. He healed the deaf. He healed the lame. He raised the dead. You tell me what he can't do. You see, they received power because they relied on the power of the God who does the impossible. And if you're going to surrender to God, you've got to get that in your mind that God, what is it that God can't do? Because if God can do anything, then I'm going to rely on him and I'll follow him wherever he tells me to go. You see how they build on each other? How was her faith so strong? Because she considered, the word means to be of the opinion of. She considered that the one who made the promise was faithful. He was reliable. He was trustworthy. He'd done it before, and he would do it again. We just had a story last month, didn't we, about this? Luke chapter 1. You remember this story? Mary and Joseph. Then the angel told her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Now listen, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end." And she asked the question that every one of us asked. Mary said, "How? How can this be? Because I've never had sexual relations with a man." And the angel replied, "The Holy Spirit." When she asked how, he said who. Because it's not about the how, it's about the who. "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. And consider your relative Elizabeth. Even she has conceived a son in her old age. And this is the 6th month for her who was called childless. For nothing will be impossible with God." It's not about the how, it's about the who. And if we're going to have faith enough to surrender to God and go wherever, whenever, do whatever, it has to come down to a reliance on his power. A reliance on his power, because reliance on divine power comes from a spiritual trust. If blind obedience comes from a spiritual focus, then reliance on divine power comes from a spiritual trust. Then we get to the third requirement, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and yet he was offering his one and only son, the one to whom it had been said, "Your offspring will be traced through Isaac." He considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead. Therefore, he received him back, figuratively speaking. Now, I recognize that I have run through a lot of stories of Abraham, assuming you know a lot of the stories. I don't have time to preach all the stories, but let me give you a little backstory here. So, God came to Sarah and Abraham when they were 65 and 75. He said, "I'm going to give you a son." When he made that promise, 25 years later, he gave them a son, right? In between that, Abraham went and tried to take matters into his own hands. He took his handmaid. He had a son through Hagar named Ishmael, right? But finally, God gave him the promise after he had patiently or not so patiently waited. 25 years later, he gets Isaac. And then as Isaac has grown up, I'm not sure how old he was, probably in his early teens or upper elementary age. I'm not sure how old he was, but God said, "Hey, I need you to take Isaac. I need you to take him out in the wilderness. I need you to kill him." Now, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at God going, "What? What are you talking about? Why would you want me to offer up my son, the one that you said is going to be the one of the promise, the one and only son? Ishmael's not going to be the son of the promise. Isaac's going to be the son of the promise. Why do you want me to do this?" But Abraham offered. Abraham offered his son. They got to the place. Isaac's carrying the wood for the fire. They get up there and Isaac goes, "Hey, Dad, where's the offering?" And Abraham says, "God will provide. It's you, son," right? He lays him on the altar. He's got a knife above his head, and he's about to kill his son, the son of the promise that he waited 25 years for. He's willing to offer his son. And God stops him, says, "Hey, there's a ram in the thistle over there. Go get it." And he killed him. Why did he offer? Because he was tested. What's the word here for tested mean? It means to find out the true character and nature of someone's heart. Abraham offered, and he passed the test because of the true nature of his heart. He was willing to offer up the result of the promise, the one who the offspring was supposed to be traced through. Now, I learned a couple things about this through this story. When God tests us, these are tough. They're tough for me to accept, okay? When God tests us and asks us to give, He does not ask us to give out of our surplus. Hear me, Americans. With all that money you got in the bank and with that nice house and with those cars, God does not ask us to give out of our surplus. Oh, I can afford to give this because I got plenty more. God wants us to give out of our lack. Now, I know what all you guys are thinking. Hey, the associate guy showed up and he's going to preach on giving. No, that's not my job. But God asks us to give out of our lack, not of our surplus. Because if I give out of my surplus, I'm like, I got plenty, I'm good. Here, you can have this because it's not going to hurt me at all. But Abraham was willing to offer his one and only son, the son of the promise, because he's asking us to give. There is no backup. The most important thing. He's asking us to give the only thing. He's asking us to give everything. So my question to you is this: what is most important to you? Is it money? Is it material wealth? We just spent 8 days in a place where it's really easy to see the need. We had one of the missionaries tell us something that was like, just jarred me. He was third day in. And we're in a village that was filled with sewer and just gross and everything. And they lived in these conditions. And he looked at me, he looked at us and he said, you know, when you're back home and you have your nice houses and your cars and all the stuff you have, it's really hard to see evil and it's really hard to see need. But it's not hard to see it here. So what is it? What do you have? What is hard for you to give up? Money, material wealth? Maybe it's your ability, your talents, your service. God has those things He wants you to give Him, right? What else? Is it family? Is it relationships? Is it your time? Here's a tough one. Is it your forgiveness to someone else? Do you understand that when God asks you for everything, He's asking you to forgive people that aren't deserving of your forgiveness? What about your significance, or your comfort, or your control? What is it? What's most important to you that you'll give God out of your surplus, but you won't give the very last bit of it? And He goes, I want you to give it all. So that's the first thing I learned. Second thing I learned is this. When God asks for an offering, He doesn't ask it because it's useful to Him. Now, this one's hard for us to understand, okay? But let me ask it to you this way. Did God need Isaac? No. God didn't need Isaac. God needed Abraham to be willing to give Isaac. And the problem is, and I'm going to put it on me, the problem is as pastors, we stand up here and we tell you the needs that we have and we ask you to give to those needs. Go on a mission trip. There's people who have need, right? Give to Project Christmas, which you should do that, right? Give to the church. But here's the thing. None of that is because God needs it. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He can do everything He needs without me. But He wants me to be willing to give because here's the third one, because surrender requires radical generosity. Surrender requires radical generosity. See, we have this need-based giving that we have done. But in Leviticus, it talks about the offerings. In Leviticus, there's these offerings that they brought to the people. So they would bring these animals and they would sacrifice them. And many of those animals, lambs, goats, doves, all kinds of animals, calves, they would take them and they would basically barbecue them. Okay? They would cook them on the altar, and many of them were for the priests and their families to eat. It was useful for them. So you're bringing an offering to take care of the staff, I guess, if you will, right? That's what they did. But some of them, there was another offering. It was called the Olah. O-L-A-H. The Olah was the burnt offering. The burnt offering, they would cook it until it was dry as Lincoln Riley's brisket. Some of you get that. They would cook it until it was burned up. Sometimes all the way to ashes, useful to no one. Why? Because it was important for the person to give it, not important for someone to enjoy it. Surrender requires radical generosity, saying that I know what's most important. I'm willing to give everything I have because I know that Jesus is more than enough. I heard a story about a pastor in Uganda. And they were on the border of the the Democratic Republic of Congo. They were on the border of that. And This village he was in was so small and so insignificant. They didn't have any major roads. In fact, this pastor had to walk 300 miles to get to school. Don't think he went every day, right? I mean, he would have to go do school so 300, that's how far they were away from everything. And also, that's how when he would go get training as a pastor. So he had this church, but they weren't really the town wasn't that significant. And so he went to this conference that was 240 miles away, left his wife and his kids in Uganda in this village, and went 240 miles away to a conference on generosity. Now, they were teaching the 3 principles of generosity. I'm going to say these fast. Come talk to me afterwards. I'll give them to you quicker if you want them. I'm going to say them fast. 3 principles of generosity. Number 1 is God owns everything. Number 2 is God has entrusted everything that he owns to humans. And number 3, God wants the humans to be generous with what he's given them. Those are the principles he learned in this generosity. Well, while he was gone, this is the early 2000s, Congo came in and just ransacked Uganda and ransacked this little village that he was in, killed some people, destroyed their property, took the people that survived and put them in refugee camps. So he travels back 240 miles, probably pretty excited because he's just been at a conference. He's been spiritually fed. He gets back, he can't find his family. He finds them in a refugee camp. He begins to gather the church people around, and they begin to try to rebuild. He doesn't know what to teach them, but God's telling him, teach them what you just learned. So he begins to teach them about generosity, the 3 principles. And he begins to tell them, we got to bring whatever we have and we got to give it all to God. And so these people began to take what they had. What they had was abilities. Some of them were good construction workers. Some of them were good farmers. So they went and they began to help people rebuild their homes. They began to replant their crops. They began to help them. There were some that were really good cooks, and so they would cook food and take them to the people who were rebuilding the homes and replanting the crops. Even the young people, the youth group, and the kids were involved, and they all were giving whatever they had. And one day at church, he's sitting there, and this lady comes in. She has no legs, and she has a chicken. And she looks at the pastor. He says, I've come to give my offering. This is all I have. It's a chicken. The pastor in his mind, he goes, I can't take this chicken. It's all this woman has. And she began to rebuke him. He said, she began to lecture me. Isn't there a story in the Bible where there was a lady who gave her last 2 pennies? So he took her chicken. They sold the chicken, and that chicken became the first brick of the church building they built as they rebuilt. Well, here's what happened. I love this that you guys are on the front row, because the youth group, the young people of this community saw this, and they were overwhelmed. And they began to go and get this lady and bring her, physically carry her to church every time church was open. Then they began to go out and work and try to find what they could do. They used their abilities to earn money so they could begin to build this woman a house. She had no house. They began to build her a house. They just continued to work. They raised enough money to buy her a wheelchair, and they pushed this lady to church in her wheelchair. And this happened, and all of a sudden, this happened because this community, this church people began to help everyone in their community, whether they were part of their church or not. They radically generous. They did everything they could to help people. And that little town now is a bustling marketplace. It has grown because of the generosity of the people. It takes radical generosity to surrender to God. How was his faith so strong, Abraham? Because he knew the principles of generosity, that God owned everything and that God would provide whatever need he had. He knew that. He knew that if he gave his last dollar or his last chicken, God would provide what he needed. See, the key is it's not about what, it's not about how much, it's about the who. It's about the who. It's about knowing that God owns everything and that he will provide whatever I need. Radical generosity comes from spiritual recognition of who's in charge. So, the 3 requirements. It's going to take blind obedience if you're going to surrender to God. It's going to take a reliance on divine power, and it's going to take radical generosity if you're going to be like Abraham and have the faith that fully surrenders. As the band comes back up, I want you to understand something. I recognize I was gone for 8 days and I didn't experience all the things that you guys did. And the reason is because I didn't have the news on. Maybe you ought to try that sometimes. It's kind of nice. There's a lot going on in our country, in our world. And I think sometimes we get drawn into this idea that God wants us to take the world, take our country back by storm. I'm about to say something that I've said before, and some of you may like it, some of you may not. But God has not called us to make this a Christian nation. God is not looking for a revolution. He's looking for a revival. He's not looking for a movement. He's looking for my movement. Do you notice that Abraham, when he went to the land that God promised, do you notice that he lived there as a foreigner? He didn't try to go in and turn Canaan into Israel. And neither did his son Isaac, and neither did his grandson Jacob. They didn't try to overturn the leaders. They didn't try to take over the land and make sure the right people were in power. In fact, when Jesus came, isn't that why he was rejected? Because he refused to be a military leader. He refused to overthrow the oppressive Roman government. I know what you're thinking. Well, but how are we going to win people for Christ? Same way he did it. 1-on-1. 2-on-2. Revival. You see, when you begin to have these things, humility and confession and surrender and witness in your life, you will win people to Christ. It's not going to come because we get the right people leading our country. It's not going to come because we overturn whoever's leading our country. That's not going to happen. God's not looking for that. One day Jesus will overthrow the evil that Satan is doing. And I know it's hard because it feels like we're losing. Go back and read the end of Hebrews chapter 11. It lists a bunch of people, and guess what they lost? They gave up their lives. They refused to win. And it says the world was not worthy of them. Because they would have rather been oppressed for Jesus than to get people to think that they were great. You see, surrender is going to take us being willing to lose. And it won't make sense, and it'll feel like you're losing, and it'll be hard. But again, I ask you, is Jesus enough? Is Jesus enough? Am I so spiritually focused that I will go wherever, whenever, and do whatever God asks me to do? And do I so spiritually trust Jesus that I will believe that He's going to do the impossible, even if I can't even see it? There's no way I can see it. Do I recognize that He's in charge and He owns everything, so I'll follow Him even when He asks for everything? Surrender is not about the what, it's not about the where, it's not about the when, the why, the how. Surrender is always about the who, and He wants you. He wants your heart. So we're going to sing and we're going to worship, and I'm going to beg you. Don't worry about what people are looking at you. I'm going to beg you not to sing the words of these songs if you're not willing to fully surrender. Man, don't say I surrender all if you're not willing to surrender all. And it's okay if you're not there right now. I'm going to pray to God that during this time of worship, you will begin to feel that tug to worship and surrender fully to Him. We're going to have prayer team members up in the front. We're going to take communion together as a body of believers. But as we worship, ask God, help me, God, to have faith enough to surrender, so I will follow you wherever you ask me to go. Let's stand. Let's worship Him.